Okay, so let's try to ignore this. We don't need to talk about this, right? Red Wings getting shut out 5-0 at their home barn. Colorado coming in here. Mackenzie Blackwood stealing the net from Scott Wedgwood. Yeah, as a Wedgwood fantasy owner, this stings. But either way, I wanted to have a trade conversation about the Detroit Red Wings based off of some talk that we have seen on the subreddit. Because when it comes to Detroit Red Wings young prospect, 21-year-old center Nate Danielson, there has been a pretty big conversation as to whether or not the Red Wings should, would, or could trade this guy away. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Wait a minute, Nate Danielson is a legitimately talented young piece that the Red Wings have in their organization who's only a few years away from actually having a significant impact in the NHL. 9th overall guy, 2023, 21 years old, and this season he is a point-per-game guy in the AHL. After showcasing a pretty decent clip with the Red Wings in the NHL, 7 points in 28 games. But here's the thing about Nate Danielson, he is not as good as he could be yet. And with the fact that the Detroit Red Wings, despite this terrible loss to Colorado today, are still one of the top 6 teams in the National Hockey League, they are still one of the top 3 teams in the entire Eastern Conference. They are still a contender. It does open the door as to whether or not Nate Danielson and the value he provides to this organization long-term is better suited for a trade that will provide value to the team short-term instead. And it's not just Danielson. There are a number of other guys that exist in the Wings organization that you can say can provide that same kind of value, but Danielson happens to have probably the most long-term value out of all of the Red Wings young dudes that are in the AHL chilling. Therefore, you can say that his name as a trade chip is probably the most controversial. This is why I wanted to take our conversation over onto the Detroit Red Wings subreddit. Because 2 days ago, you had a post made by Don Sal C. saying that Nate Danielson should not be untouchable in trades. I'm sick of how often people keep saying, we can't trade Nate. He is not the next Celebrini. He is not the next Hank. He is likely the next Darren Helm. You can find a Helm-type player for cheap very easily in this league. If getting a guy like Panarin or a legit shut-down top-4 defenseman requires moving Danielson, then I say do it, because those players will have more impact for us than Danielson ever will as a mid to bottom 6 forward. Now, that's a pretty hot take. I do think that comparing Nate Danielson to Darren Helm is, in a way, understating what Nate Danielson is capable of. That's not to disrespect Darren Helm. I mean, Helm was a very good Red Wing. You take a look at the penalty killing, the dog-like nature that he played with, the 30-point seasons that he had. This was a guy who provided some pretty reasonable memories for the Detroit Red Wings, and he's a 2-time Stanley Cup champion. What's more to like out of a guy who legitimately spent a good chunk of his career with Detroit? Not saying that that's a bad standard to be compared to, but Nate Danielson is quite literally a point-per-game guy right now at 21 years old in the AHL. I wouldn't be surprised if Danielson had himself, let's say, 3 or 4 seasons in the NHL that outproduced what Darren Helm was able to do in 1 year. Now, of course, in order for Danielson to do that, he would need to overtake Comfer and all these other guys at center. He would probably need to overtake Marco Kasper. But ultimately, I do think it's possible within the body that Nate Danielson has. But this post on the Reddit goes out there and talks about how this guy should not be untouchable in trades if it's Panarin coming back or a legit top 4 defenseman coming back. They're saying that Danielson should be privy to being moved. Another reply says they are talking about Robert Thomas from St. Louis now. A reply says, if Danielson and some extra stuff can get you Robert Thomas, why would you not want to do that? I'd rather see Thomas than Panarin, but Panarin would excite the city. It could be a momentum thing. And Thomas would be cheaper, with the potential to add 20 points with the Wings. Another reply says, I think trading Nate Danielson is fine, but for a 34-year-old Panarin that typically doesn't show up as well in the playoffs? Nah. Not for Panarin, another commenter said. That's a bad trade. Use picks for that. Nate for a Thomas package I'd be okay with. Who has said we cannot trade Nate Danielson? I think a lot of people are open to trading him if the return is good. The last thread, Panarin, came up and there was a lot of people saying exactly that. A young guy on a cheap contract with massive upside versus a 34-year-old at the end of his career wanting $10 million a year? Yeah, that's going to be a no from me, dog. I want a team that will compete every year, not a one-trick pony. And let's be honest, Panarin alone isn't going to win us a cup, so why trade a top prospect? And so there are a number of people disagreeing with Panarin, Thomas, Nate Danielson. This original poster went out there and asked, hey, I totally get the line of thought, but what if Nate doesn't pan out? What if the next prospect we hung on to because we thought they'd be the future doesn't pan out, and we miss a chance to improve because we believed in the thought of what could be over going out and trying to get a proven NHLer? That's my main point in all this. I feel like we're overcommitted to the idea of what a prospect could be compared to what they could help the Red Wings get right now. But I do question whether or not this Panarin assessment here is all too fair. I mean, it is true that Panarin wants a lot of money. It's already been outed that he wants potentially $10 plus, $11 plus million a year in his next contract, and he is 34 years old. But I'll go out there and say this again, that yes, you don't want to invest in NHL players 34 and beyond, but if they are absolute superstar players, sometimes it's worth it to bite the bullet. Sometimes it's worth it to have a Sidney Crosby or an Ovechkin or a, I don't know, Patrick Kane, for example, because these guys defy the expectations of what a normal 35, 36, 37-year-old is actually capable of doing. I would bet to wager that Artemi Panarin doesn't have a significant fall-off at age 35, 36 in the way that most NHLers do, because Panarin is a different animal. He is on pace for 87 points over 79 games this year, despite the fact that the Rangers are dog water. This is a guy that has proven time and time again that he can score no matter what, and until he stops scoring, I'm not really going to be convinced otherwise. Now, is it likely that he is unable to be an 87-point guy for the rest of the next contract that he gets? I'd say it's not realistic for him to consistently get that, but I'm not projecting Panarin to fall down to like 60, 50 points right away. If anything, I think he hovers in the 80-plus point range for a while before inevitably dipping subtly and then just becoming more of a top six option rather than an elite first liner. Is Nate Danielson worth that cost? Is the long-term future of what Danielson could be at 25, 26, 29 years old worth it to get those last few years of Panarin? Maybe, maybe not. You can agree or disagree in the comment section below. That is your prerogative. But ultimately, when it comes to Panarin, when it comes to Robert Thomas, I want you to let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. How do you feel about these guys and the idea of the Red Wings trading for them? Thomas is 26. Not as good as Panarin, but hey, he was an 80-point center last year, so there definitely is a lot of value there as well. I would think that Thomas is a better fit longer term, but Panarin is also exciting, in my opinion at least. You can let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. How do you feel about these trade ideas? I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.